My son-in-law tried to claim half my farm after my daughter filed for divorce, arguing he had contributed to maintaining the property's value while I was recovering from a heart attack. In court, my solicitor played a voicemail of him telling his mate, "The old man's on his way out anyway, we just need to hold on a bit longer and the whole place is ours." His face when the judge heard that was something I will carry with me for the rest of my days. He's since left 17 messages with my solicitor's receptionist, each one more desperate than the last. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who aired his family's troubles in public. But I'm 68 years old, I've spent 40 years building something on this land, and what happened over the past 2 years nearly took all of it, not just the farm, but what little faith I had left in people. So I'm telling it. From the beginning. My name is Lawrence. I farmed the same 320 hectares outside of Feilding for most of my adult life. My late wife Barbara and I bought the property in 1986 with a modest inheritance from her parents and a loan that kept us both awake most nights for the first decade. We ran sheep and beef, nothing flashy, just honest work. Barbara passed away from ovarian cancer 11 years ago. After that, it was just me and the land and my daughter, Carolyn. Carolyn is 39. She's always been clever, sharper than me in most ways, which I say with genuine pride. She did well at school in Palmerston North, studied business management at Massey University, and came back to the region working in supply chain for a food processing company in Feilding. Around the time she turned 32, she met a man named Warren through mutual friends at a function in town. He presented well. Good-looking, competent, worked in commercial real estate in Palmerston North. Said all the right things. I remember thinking he seemed almost too polished for someone our age. But Carolyn was happy, and her happiness was what mattered to me. They married 2 years after they met. A small ceremony at a winery just outside Martinborough, maybe 80 guests. I gave a speech I'd been writing in my head for weeks. I meant every word of it. For the first couple of years, things seemed fine. Warren would come out to the farm on weekends occasionally. He'd walk the fence lines with me, ask questions about the stock, say how much he loved the land. I took it at face value. I didn't know then that a man can perform interest the same way he performs anything else. My heart attack came in the winter of 2022. I was moving a mob of ewes down from the top block when it happened. My farm hand, a reliable young bloke named Ihaka, found me on the track and called the ambulance. I spent 9 days in Palmerston North Hospital and came home with a list of restrictions that felt like a personal insult at 66 years of age. No heavy lifting. No stressful situations. Regular check-ins with my GP. The specialist was frank with me, another event like that and I may not be so fortunate. Carolyn was wonderful in those early weeks. She took time off work, stayed at the farm, helped manage things. Warren came out a few times as well, and I was grateful for it. He helped Ihaka with some fencing, drove into town for supplies, seemed genuinely concerned. I told Carolyn she'd chosen better than I'd initially given him credit for. I was wrong. And I should have known I was wrong sooner than I did. About 6 weeks after I came home from hospital, things shifted. Warren started having conversations with me about the farm structure. Was it in a trust? Had I updated my will since Barbara passed? Had I spoken to a financial advisor recently? I answered the questions honestly, because I had no reason not to. The farm was in my name, held in a family trust with Carolyn as the sole beneficiary. I had a straightforward will. I hadn't seen a financial advisor in several years, which he suggested I should remedy. I thought he was being practical. Responsible. The kind of son-in-law who thought ahead. I was recovering from a cardiac event. I didn't have the mental energy to read between the lines. It was Ihaka who first said something to me. He's in his late 20s, grew up on a farm near Martin, and has worked for me for nearly 5 years. He's not one to gossip or cause trouble. One afternoon in early spring, after Warren had driven back to Palmerston North, Ihaka came into the kitchen for a cup of tea and said, quiet as anything, "I don't want to speak out of turn, Lawrence. but I heard him on the phone out near the wool shed yesterday. He was talking about what the land was worth per hectare and whether a lifestyle block could be subdivided off the front paddocks. Didn't sound like he was asking for your benefit. I sat with that for a while. I thanked Ihaka and told him I'd keep it in mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. A few weeks later, I mentioned to Carolyn that I was thinking of getting a solicitor to look over the trust structure, just to make sure everything was in order now that my health had changed. She agreed it was sensible. What I didn't tell her was that the meeting with my solicitor, a woman named Susan Bradshaw who'd handled my affairs for years and who I trusted completely, was also about something else. I wanted to understand what, if anything, Warren could claim in a divorce. I didn't like thinking about it. But Ihaka's words had lodged somewhere I couldn't dislodge them from. Susan was thorough. She explained that because the farm was held in a family trust with Carolyn as beneficiary rather than as her personal property, it was somewhat protected. However, she said, if Warren could demonstrate that he had made significant contributions to the trust property, labor, investment, or management, a family court could potentially recognize some form of entitlement. It was a stretch, she said. But not impossible. She also told me something I hadn't considered. If Carolyn and Warren were to separate, and if Warren made any such claim, it would be Carolyn's legal battle to fight, not mine. The trust protected me. But it didn't protect Carolyn from a prolonged, expensive dispute. I went home that afternoon and sat on the back veranda looking out over the home paddock for a long time. I want to be honest about something. I didn't yet have proof that Warren was planning anything. I had Ihaka's account of a phone call. I had a series of questions that could have been interpreted as genuine financial concern. I had a feeling in my gut that I'd learned, at 66 years of age, to take seriously. But I didn't have anything solid. That changed on a Saturday evening in October. Carolyn had gone to Wellington for a hens weekend for a friend from university. Warren stayed at the farm, something that had been happening more regularly, which I'd told myself was because he enjoyed the place. That evening, I'd gone to bed early, as I tended to do since the heart attack. Around 10 o'clock I got up to get a glass of water. I could hear Warren on the phone in the living room. The door wasn't fully closed. I'm not someone who eavesdrops. I want to be clear about that. I stood in the hallway because I heard my own name spoken, and something in the tone stopped me. The old man's on his way out anyway, Warren was saying. His voice was relaxed, easy, the way people talk when they feel completely safe. The heart attack was just the first one. Doc told him to ease up. He won't ease up. We just need to hold on a bit longer and the whole place is ours. 320 hectares 20 minutes from Feilding. Do you know what that's worth right now? I've already had 2 conversations with agents. Just preliminary, just exploratory. But yeah. The numbers are real. There was a pause. Then, Carolyn doesn't need to know the details yet. She's a bit squeamish about the money side of things. But she'll be fine once it's done. She's always done what makes her comfortable, and comfortable means not asking too many questions. I went back to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. My chest felt strange, not the cardiac kind of strange, just the hollow kind. The kind that comes when you realize something you'd hoped wasn't true has turned out to be exactly as bad as you feared. The next morning I was civil. Made breakfast. Asked about his football team. Watched him eat toast at my kitchen table and talk about property markets in Manawatu. I have never in my life had to work so hard to keep my face still. After he left, I called Susan. I told her what I'd heard. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, very carefully, Lawrence, what I'm about to suggest may feel uncomfortable. But if Warren does intend to make a claim against the trust assets in the event of a separation from Carolyn, documenting his actual contributions, and lack thereof, is the most important thing we can do right now. She explained that New Zealand's family property law, particularly the Property Relationships Act 1976, primarily governs the division of relationship property between partners, not trust assets. But courts had, in some cases, looked at contributions to trust property when determining whether an adjustment was warranted. The key, she said, was demonstrating that Warren's contributions to the farm were minimal and that any presence he'd had on the property was social, not substantive. I started keeping a log. Dates and times when Warren visited. What he did, specifically, when he was here. Conversations of note. I asked Ihaka to do the same, informally, just his own recollection in his own words. Ihaka didn't hesitate. He said he'd been keeping his own mental records since that phone call by the wool shed. I also, on Susan's advice and with careful attention to New Zealand's privacy legislation, began keeping a small digital recorder on my person during the times Warren visited. I want to be clear, I never recorded private phone calls, and I was present in every conversation that was recorded. The purpose was not entrapment. It was documentation of a man who was saying very different things depending on who was listening. Over the following months, I gathered material. Warren visiting the farm and spending most of his time on his own phone. Warren talking to me about subdivisions and lifestyle blocks while I was careful to never agree to anything. Warren, over Christmas dinner, telling my neighbor Malcolm that he'd been really pouring himself into helping Lawrence manage the place since the heart attack, while I sat 3 feet away saying nothing. The recording that mattered most happened in late February, the following year. Warren had come out for a long weekend. On the Sunday afternoon, he took a call in the back garden that he clearly thought I couldn't hear from the kitchen. I could. The window was open. Yeah, I've had a couple of mates ask about the investment opportunity, he said. I've told them to hold off until the timing's right. It's a bit delicate. The old man's actually hanging in there better than I expected. But look, Carolyn's getting a bit tired of the whole rural life routine anyway. I give it 12 months. 18 at the outside. Once it's done, we can talk properly. I had Susan review the recordings. She brought in a barrister to provide an independent opinion. The barrister's view was direct. If Warren were to make a claim against trust assets citing his contributions to the property, this material would significantly undermine that claim, not only by contradicting his narrative of meaningful involvement, but by demonstrating a premeditated financial motive that a court would likely view unfavorably. In March of last year, Carolyn came to me on her own. She sat at the kitchen table, which is where every important conversation in this house has ever happened, and she said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. Things with Warren hadn't been right for a while. She'd felt, increasingly, that he saw their life as a transaction rather than a relationship. She'd noticed him pulling back from her emotionally while becoming more interested in conversations about property and assets. She asked me, quietly, whether I'd ever had concerns. I told her the truth. Not everything, not all at once, but the truth. I told her about Ihaka's account of the phone call by the wool shed. I told her about the conversation I'd overheard in October. I told her I'd been keeping documentation, and that I'd taken legal advice. I told her I was sorry I hadn't come to her sooner, and that I hadn't been sure how. She was very quiet for a long time. Then she said, "How long has he been planning this?" I said I didn't know exactly. But from what I could piece together, at least since the period shortly after my heart attack. She asked to see the recordings. I let her listen to the February one. She sat with her hands flat on the table and didn't say anything for almost a minute. Then she said, "I need to call a solicitor of my own." She did. She retained a family law specialist in Palmerston North. I will not use that woman's name here, but she was, by all accounts, very good. Warren was served with separation papers in April. Carolyn had moved most of her things to her own rental in Palmerston North by the time he received them. His response was not what he'd told his mate on the phone. He did not accept the situation quietly. He retained a lawyer, an aggressive one, from a firm in Wellington, and within 3 weeks, he filed a counterclaim citing, among other things, his substantial contributions to the maintenance and management of the family trust property during Lawrence Bennett's period of ill health, and claiming an equitable interest in trust assets as a result. I read that filing with Susan in her office on a Thursday morning. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses and said, "Well, he's committed to the story." The family court proceedings took the better part of 8 months. Warren's legal team built a case around the idea that he had been, in effect, a de facto farm manager during my recovery, that his labor, expertise, and decision-making had materially contributed to the trust property's continued value. His barrister was polished and thorough. She cited case law, produced a handful of photos of Warren in work gear around the farm, and presented several text messages from Carolyn in which she thanked him for helping out during a difficult period. What they didn't know was what we had. Ihaka gave a sworn statement. He was precise, honest, and unambiguous. He described his own role in the day-to-day management of the farm during my recovery in detail, the hours he worked, the decisions he made, the tasks he completed. He described Warren's visits as infrequent, his labor as minimal and occasional, and confirmed that to his knowledge, Warren had never made a single management decision regarding the farm. He stated plainly that he had been present on most of the occasions when Warren had visited, and that the characterization of Warren as having managed the property was, in his view, not accurate. My own log showed 12 visits from Warren in the 14 months following my heart attack. Of those, Ihaka's records confirmed substantive farm work on precisely 2 occasions, both involving fencing assistance that lasted less than half a day. And then there were the recordings. Susan submitted them as evidence. Warren's legal team objected, arguing they were obtained without consent and should be excluded. The judge reviewed the submissions carefully and noted that the recordings were of conversations in which I was a participant and which took place on my own property. The objection was denied. Selected portions were played in the courtroom. I was there. So was Carolyn. So was Warren. When the February recording played, the old man's actually hanging in there better than I expected, and once it's done, we can talk properly. I watched Warren's face from across the room. He'd been composed until that moment. The composure left. What replaced it was something I can only describe as the expression of a man who has just realized, very suddenly, that everything he thought was secured is gone. His barrister asked for a brief adjournment. The judge granted 15 minutes. When proceedings resumed, the barrister's tone had changed. She was still professional, but the confidence was gone. She attempted to contextualize the recording as venting and speculative conversation, not evidence of intent. The judge listened politely and said very little. The ruling came down 3 weeks later. The judge found that Warren's contributions to the trust property were minimal and did not rise to the level that would warrant any adjustment in relation to trust assets. She noted, in terms that were more pointed than I expected, that the evidence presented, particularly the audio material, raised serious questions about whether Warren's involvement in the property during Lawrence's recovery was motivated by genuine contribution or by the anticipation of future personal financial benefit. She declined to award him any interest in the trust. She also noted that Carolyn's own personal property, her savings, her vehicle, a small investment account, would be divided in accordance with the standard provisions of the Property Relationships Act, as these were relationship property. That was fair. Carolyn had accepted it from the beginning. It was the farm that had never been Carolyn's to give, and it was the farm he'd been after all along. Warren was ordered to pay a contribution toward legal costs. The amount was $32,000. In the weeks after the ruling, I learned things from Carolyn that filled in gaps I hadn't been able to account for. She'd found, going through shared financial records, that Warren had taken 3 meetings with real estate agents, including one who specialized in rural subdivision, in the 18 months following my heart attack. He'd been pricing lifestyle block conversions on the front paddocks. He'd also, she discovered, spoken to a business broker about the valuation of my neighbor's property, apparently trying to understand comparable land values in the area. None of this had ever been discussed with Carolyn or with me. She also found out, through a mutual friend, that Warren had borrowed a significant sum of money from his parents, telling them he had an investment opportunity in rural property that was effectively guaranteed. His parents are now, from what I understand, pursuing their own private dispute with him over that money. As for Warren himself, he's gone quiet. He left Palmerston North sometime in the months after the ruling, and I believe he's in Auckland now. He has not attempted to contact me. His solicitor sent one follow-up letter to Susan asking whether I'd consider waiving the costs order in exchange for a clean release of all further claims. Susan's response was brief and, I'm told, not especially warm. It is now spring. The farm is in reasonable shape. Ihaka is still here, still reliable, still making better decisions about the top block than I would. My health has been stable, not perfect, but stable. I walk the fence lines when I can. I watch the light change over the ranges in the evening, the way it goes gold over the Ruahine foothills before the dark comes in, and I think about what this land is worth, not in dollars per hectare, not in subdivision potential, but in the way it holds 40 years of a life. Carolyn is doing well. She's got a good flat in Palmerston North, closer to her work. We have dinner most Sundays. She doesn't talk about Warren much. Neither do I. There isn't much to say that the recordings didn't already say more clearly than either of us could. I found a letter Barbara wrote to Carolyn before she died, tucked in the back of a folder I was sorting through last month. Barbara had written it when Carolyn was about 20, during the period when Barbara first got sick and was trying to put certain things down on paper in case she didn't get the chance to say them later. The letter was about a lot of things, being honest, being kind, not letting yourself be made small by people who see your worth only in what they can take from it. Near the end she wrote, "The people who love you well will never need you to be less than you are. Watch for the ones who seem to want to manage you. They're not loving you. They're positioning themselves." I think about that a lot. There are things this experience has confirmed for me, at 68, that I wish I'd understood more clearly at 30. Trust is not built quickly. Anyone who tries to accelerate your trust, who comes in warm and capable and interested and who makes you feel, in a short time, that they are indispensable, is worth watching carefully. That warmth can be genuine. But it can also be a performance, and the difference is not always visible until the person feels they no longer need to perform. Document what matters. Not because you should live in suspicion of the people around you, but because memory is unreliable. People are not always who they present themselves to be, and a record kept quietly and honestly is worth more than 100 conversations conducted without one. I would not have been able to protect the farm without Ihaka's statement, without Susan's guidance, without my own careful log. The truth was true whether I wrote it down or not. But writing it down is what made the truth usable. Legal structures matter. The family trust that Barbara and I set up decades ago, on the advice of an accountant who told us it was worth the paperwork, is what created the distance between the farm and Warren's claim. That trust was not created to keep anyone out. It was created to protect something we'd built together. It did exactly what it was meant to do. If you have assets of any significance and no legal structure around them, please speak to someone who can help you think it through. It matters more than most people realize until the moment it matters most. And the last thing. The one I find hardest to say plainly but will say anyway. Be careful who you let close to the people you love. Not because the world is full of people like Warren, it isn't. Most people are decent. But the ones who aren't are often very good at finding people who are open and trusting, and positioning themselves near the things those people stand to inherit or build or protect. I don't say this to make anyone afraid. I say it because I wish someone had said it to me, in plain language, before any of this began. The farm is still here. The Ruahines are still there in the evening. Barbara's roses along the front fence are coming back now that the frosts have eased, the same deep red they've always been. I'm still here too. That's enough.